So here's a question for you. Are the world's most powerful companies really trying to solve the climate crisis? Or is it all just a really, really good PR campaign? Well, that is the big billion-dollar question we are tackling today. We're going to sift through the evidence and find out if those glossy corporate climate promises are worth the paper they're printed on. All right, let's lay out our investigation. First, we'll ground ourselves in the basic science. Then, we'll put on our detective hats and follow some corporate clues. After that, we'll get into the whole tricky business of greenwashing, pit two corporate giants against each other, and finally, open up the accountability toolkit to see what real change actually looks like. Okay, first things first. Before we even look at a single company report, we have to get on the same page about the fundamental science. This is the baseline truth that sets the stage for everything else. Now, what's so powerful here is just how simple this is. This isn't some super complex, debatable theory anymore. It's a direct relationship, almost like a math equation. The more carbon we pump into the atmosphere, the hotter the planet gets. Period. This is the ticking clock of our investigation. So, who are the biggest players in this story? Well, the data paints a pretty clear picture. A huge chunk of greenhouse gas emissions comes from just a few key sectors. We're talking electricity, industry, transportation. And guess who dominates those sectors? Yep, the world's largest corporations. This is where the power and, frankly, the responsibility really lies. So now let's get into the investigation itself. We're going to zero in on the 100 most powerful companies on the U.S. stock market, the S&P 100, and start following the evidence. And this right here is the core question we're trying to answer. I mean, these companies have almost unimaginable resources. So the big question is, are they using all that financial muscle to build a healthier planet? Or are they just building bigger bank accounts? And when we say resources, we are talking about a staggering amount of money. Just look at this number. That's the average free cash these companies had just sitting around in a single year. So, the whole debate about whether they can afford to invest in things like renewable energy or carbon capture, it's not really a debate. The data shows they absolutely can. Okay, our first clue is a bit of a mind bender. You would think the companies that started talking about climate change first would be the leaders today, right? Well, the data tells a very, very different story. You can see here, most of these corporate giants have been publishing sustainability reports for over a decade. They've been in the game for a long time. But one recent study uncovered a pretty shocking twist in the plot. Let that sink in for a second. The companies that were first to the party, the ones talking about sustainability the longest, are, on average, emitting more. This is a huge finding. It tells us that just talking about the problem doesn't mean you're actually solving it. All right, our second clue points us towards something that does seem to work, and it's basically getting a second set of eyes on your homework. The evidence is pretty clear. When a company voluntarily brings in an independent auditor to check its environmental and social data, what we call ESG data, its emissions tend to be lower. It just makes sense, right? But here's the kicker. Only about 11% of these massive companies actually do it. It's a proven tool that's mostly just sitting on the shelf. And this, right here, is our third clue. And it's a great reminder that every industry has its own story and nobody gets a free pass. We tend to think of big tech as a clean industry, and yeah, their overall emissions are lower. But look closer. They've actually been creeping up since 2017. It proves you've got to dig past the headlines and get into the real data. So you take all these clues together, the gap between talk and action, the fact that so few companies get audited, these surprising industry trends, and it all points to one giant problem: greenwashing. So what is greenwashing? Simply put, it's when a company spends more time, money, and energy marketing itself as green than on actually being green. It's the art of looking good without necessarily doing good. And the temptation to greenwash is just massive. I mean, look at this. Almost every single one of these top-tier companies has a public green mission. They've all got the slick reports and the inspiring commercials, but that billion-dollar question just keeps coming back. Is it backed by real, measurable action? So let's make this real. We're going to dive into a case study and put two household names from the S&P 100 right under the microscope to see how their words stack up against their actions. And whoa, the data tells two completely different stories. In the very same year, 2020, Apple's greenhouse gas emissions shot up by a massive 91%. at the exact same time, Boeing's emissions plummeted. These numbers are almost unbelievable, but they are very real. Now, Boeing wasn't shy about this. Their reports were transparent, they showed clear progress toward the goals they'd set for 2025, and they talked about it publicly. The data and the story they told actually matched up. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. This is a direct quote from Apple's environmental report from that same year. They're claiming consistent reductions at the exact moment their own data shows a 91% increase in emissions. I mean, this is a textbook case of a disconnect between words and actions. So what do we do? If we can't always trust what companies say, and if waiting for them to act voluntarily isn't cutting it, what's the actual solution? How do we get from empty promises to real, tangible progress? Well, the verdict from our investigation points to a really powerful tool: smart regulation. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC, has proposed this game-changing new rule. It would basically stop making climate disclosures voluntary. It would force every public company to report their emissions using the same set of rules, creating a level playing field so we can all compare apples to apples. And this is really why this matters so much. When you create real accountability for the biggest industrial polluters, it has this incredible ripple effect. It lets us attack the problem at its source. And it means we can focus on other vital solutions, like creating a more sustainable food system, without putting that entire burden on the backs of farmers. Because at the end of the day, having standardized, transparent data is an unbelievably powerful tool. But it's still just a tool. The real question this whole investigation leaves us with is this: once we can all see the numbers clearly, how will we, as investors, as consumers, as citizens, use that knowledge to demand real change? How will we hold power to account?